It is the Raw Meat Podcast. Greg Adams and Puff. We are in our new Raw Meat home. This is a lot nicer than what we were doing before, huh?
It is. It is a lot nicer. A lot of work for me, though, because I got to figure all this crap out.
Yeah, but you're semi-familiar with what's going on that side of the room. We have moved into this new facility. We have new cameras. We can go live now, so we will be live on YouTube through 1130 The Tiger. We'll also be live on Facebook with 1130 The Tiger. And if you happen to miss any of the videos while we're live, the great thing about both of those platforms is that this will live forever. So you can go back and watch these.
It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on YouTube until we decide they're not going to be there anymore.
Or until YouTube decides that we've done something and they need to remove us.
Improper.
Yeah. So what we're going to do today, this is basically Season 3 of the Raw Meat Podcast. We've been through a couple of different formats. We've done a couple of different things. Basically, what we used to do was review or recap or preview what was going on with the contemporary product, what was going on Monday nights, on Tuesdays, and on pay-per-views. We'd make predictions. We'd go through all that. We would do interviews, did a lot of that. And then we took a hiatus, came back, did something very similar, took another hiatus. Now we're into the new studio. And what we've decided to do is change the format once again. So we're going to approach this now something that's accessible to everybody who's a wrestling fan. Whether you used to be a wrestling fan, you just got back into wrestling, you've watched the product the whole time, we're going to be able to talk to everybody.
Greg, the whole reason we really did this, you might as well be honest from the start, is so that we don't have to have Jay in here. Because Jay doesn't want to put in the effort to compile a list or do anything. If it's just a list of matches, he'll come in blind and guess. But as far as putting in work towards anything at all, he's not going to do that. So, yeah.
That is absolutely not the reason why we have done this. But what we have decided to do is take and Jay is welcome to come in, too. You will see Jay Watley on some podcasts down the line.
No, you won't.
I say yes, he says no, we'll find out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a top 5 approach to everything. We're going to take a top 5 approach to things going on now, things from when we were watching as youngsters back in the day, 5 things for the future. We're just gonna do top 5 lists, and we're gonna kick it off in a way that is really contemporary, because we are on the doorstep of the 25th anniversary of Monday Night Raw. That's going to be happening in just a couple of weeks. It's going to be the biggest Monday Night Raw ever.
Oh, God, the guest list is insane. You got DX coming back, all the members, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. I think they just added Gene Okerlund. You got Stone Cold, The Undertaker, Bruce Pritchett, Brother Love. I mean, the list is endless. It's just going to be probably the craziest Monday Night Raw ever.
And so in honor of that, in honor of Monday Night Raw hitting their 25th anniversary, which actually happened this week, right?
Was it last? It was yesterday, I think.
Yesterday. So in honor of that, we are going to do our 5 favorite Raw memories of all time. And we're going to do our memories, not the 5 greatest moments of Raw ever or anything like that. What do we remember? It would be as kids, based on our generation. We were kids watching Raw back in the day. So in our entire lifetime of watching Monday Night Raw, our favorite memories we remember when we look back on it. So I've actually got a huge list that doesn't include my top 5. Do you want to go through some of... We'll recap some of the things we don't get to before number 1s, because this list is way deeper than 5. There's just too much to get to.
See, I had a list of 25, and I started cutting stuff. That's how I did it. I had my big, long list, and I was like, you know what? This, to me, is more memorable than that, so I just started cutting stuff, and I whittled my list down to 5.
And let's be upfront with everybody. These conversations start basically from arguments in the office anyway. So these are just us arguing over 1 or 2 things that then boils over into, okay, well, what's your top 5? And then it turns into this. So this one actually, I think, kind of started because I had a number 1 moment, my favorite moment of all time.
So stupid.
When you started naming yours, I realized that my number 1 didn't even make your top 4, I think. And after you actually sat down and looked at it, I don't think my number 1 is going to make your top 5 at all.
Oh, no. It wasn't even in my top 10 by the time I got done.
Oh, this is ridiculous. Okay, fine. Let's get into the actual list. I will start with my number 5. This is a moment that I remember when I was a kid, and it changed not just professional wrestling, but it changed me from this point moving forward. when Shawn and Triple H held their press conference.
Oh, yeah, that was a great moment.
When they basically started using language that I don't know how to describe it. And what's actually great is now we can go back and we can actually watch the unedited versions. But you didn't need the unedited versions. You knew what they were saying.
Yeah, the censor who was dumping said language was doing a poor job, let's just say.
It, to me, sticks out in my mind when I look back on things as a moment that I loved at the time. I still love today. It's one of my 5 favorite moments in Monday Night Raw history, and beyond just what it meant to WWE, but like to me, it really changed things because I was right in that wheelhouse of that age and that generation where when all of a sudden these guys are doing it, you realize it's cool. And so it, it leads to detentions and in-school suspensions and that kind of thing. So
kind of funny. Your number 5 was a DX moment.
Yep.
My number 5 is a DX moment. D-Generation X invades WCW.
Oh, yeah.
I just remember, them loaded up on the tank, looking just badass, Road Dogg doing Road Dogg things, and just like the balls on these guys to, oh, there's an open door, let's try to get in. And then I don't know if anybody out there listens to the Bruce Pritchard podcast, listening to the backstories where it's like, we got told we couldn't do that, but nobody said we couldn't try to do that. So to me, growing up, that was just a great moment, and now that I know the story behind the moment, I love it even more.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say is I remember that specific moment, but hearing after the fact people like what Chris Jericho's response to it was, where the guys inside WCW are actually at the door, they're watching out, they're like, oh my God, do you guys see this? This is really happening. That makes it even cooler, but in the moment, that was unheard of.
It was a war. It was a literal war that everyone knew about, but no one really talked about until that moment. And it was a game changer, not because that's when I used to, growing up, I would watch WCW. And then guys like The Undertaker and stuff came on, and then Raw started, where I started, splitting my time 50-50. And then when D-Generation X started doing stuff like that, and some of the other angles I'm going to talk about personally on my list happened, that's when I started from, instead of 50-50, 75-25, into completely eliminating WCW from my wrestling watching completely.
And I think there are a lot of people like us, but you and I were actually sort of in different spots because I grew up early on, very early on, like wrestling buddy matches age. I was a WWF guy. The Bushwhackers, when I was really little, those were my favorites. Hulk Hogan was my favorite. Like those guys, I hated Ted DiBiase. Like I knew I hated Ted DiBiase. And so I watched WWF really young, and then as I got older, I found WCW, and I think I found it through, no joke, watching American Gladiators. And I think I saw a commercial where Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart had done like a press conference where he was coming to WCW, and it was, oh man, Hulk Hogan's going to be on WCW. I have to watch now. And when the NWO hit, I actually was swayed all the way into Eric Bischoff's world. I was a WCW guy for probably a year. But what was happening is I was, and I hope I'm not alone in this, my dad did one of the coolest dad things ever, would set up a VCR to record the other one while we watched one. And so we would get done with one, and sometimes I'd be allowed to stay up late and watch a little bit of the other, but we were recording Raw for the longest time and then having to watch it back on tape.
Oh, yeah, we did that at my household, except we watched Raw live and then went back and was like, and then we watched Nitro.
See, and eventually it flipped. Eventually we got to the point, and there is a point. I'm just going to dive right into number 4 because number 4 is the point that, to me, ended Nitro as the number 1 in our household. From this point on, no longer did we actually watch Nitro as the primary. Nitro was just the afterthought. Mick Foley wins the WWF Championship.
You got it at 4. Huh?
I got it at 4. And it's because there are other things that I remember for me. Again, this is my list, not the best moments list, if we're doing a best moments list, Mick Foley winning the championship is 1 or 2. But for me personally, when Mick Foley won that championship, and it was because I've heard them talk on like the Monday Night Wars on the network. I've heard people in podcasts talk about it as that being the moment, because when Bischoff or Schiavone or whoever it was says on Nitro that they're giving Mick Foley the belt
Who wants
on
to watch
Raw,
that crap?
we actually, in my living room, my dad and my brother and I went, how?
Exactly, and a lot of families did that. I was watching Raw live, and we had Nitro, and I remember even as a youngster, I don't know, maybe 12 when that happened, however old I was, and I remember watching Nitro back, and they had the finger poke of doom going that night. And
I didn't even see that in real time because we were gone already.
Yeah, but when they said it, I was like, why would you do that? Everybody loves Mick Foley. Like, you had Mick Foley. He was Cactus Jack. Your audience knows him.
For us, it was how. Like, how are they going to do that? It doesn't make sense. So we have to go see how it happens.
But I don't know, I know we're getting a bit off track, but I don't know how Eric Bischoff ever thought it was a good idea to say, hey, one of our former top guys are about to win the top competition's top title right now.
I think it was actually brilliant, though, up until that moment, because when we made the full switch, I loved the idea that when Raw was taped, or even when they were live and Bischoff just knew ahead of time what they were doing, he would spoil it. And I, as a punk little kid, thought, oh my God, that's so cool. They're punishing them for the way that they're doing business. These guys are doing business better. They're better because they can do this. So I actually enjoyed that. Up until that moment, I think it made sense for them. But then at that moment, and it wasn't necessarily, like, that would have been cool if WCW was still rolling along as hot as they were. It would have been a blip on the radar, but there were already cracks in the foundation. That was just the earthquake that really sunk them in.
All right, time for my number 4. That moment will be on my list, and since we already talked about it, we can kind of just gloss over. But my number 4, Vince reveals himself as the higher power.
I'm so glad that you have that on the list.
It was me, Austin. I mean, when you watch Monday Night Raw, when they show, like, Raw here recently has been showing the top moments and sizzle reels, and guess what's in every single one of them? Vince pulling off the cover and just that face. Maybe they don't show the whole segment, but that is just one of the most iconic and memorable moments in the history of Monday Night Raw. You can't have a list without it.
All right, I know this is your number 4, and so I hate to do this. I want to skip to my number 3 because my number 3 is the revealing of the higher power. So this moment, and I need to actually sit down at some point and figure out my timelines, because there are things that I distinctly remember about Raw, but I don't remember if I was watching them in real time or watching them back on Tuesday night on tape. And it just feels in my mind like it was contemporary, because in this moment we didn't really have the explosion of the internet. Now we didn't have online dirt sheets. We didn't have Facebook Messenger where you can just message your friend and say, oh my God, did you see what just happened? Did you see what happened?
It was a lot of effort to get into an AOL chat room, kids.
Yeah, and that's even if you had the disc.
Yeah.
So there was freedom. There was spoiler free. Like, kids at school would ruin things for you if they could, but most of us were in the same situation where most of us were watching one or the other, and one was on tape. And so the spoiler alert thing, it's easier for me to handle spoilers with movies and TV shows now, because I spent a good 4 or 5 years of my school life trying to be spoiler free on wrestling. But the higher power was one of those things where I remember in school, I remember people actually talking about the higher power leading up to it, about how there's somebody, and we bought into it too. We were such marks. We were middle school marks. We bought into the idea that there's some clandestine, behind the scenes, evil force that's doing this, and we bought it all, but it was so fun.
Well, not only was it fun, but that really kicked the Austin Vince McMahon rivalry into high gear. And for me, that's what defined the Attitude Era. A lot of people say, well, the Attitude Era was this rivalry or this moment. Really, the Attitude Era as a whole was defined by Austin versus Vince.
No argument here.
And then everything around the WWE universe was built around that. The Undertaker becoming champion, everything came from Austin versus McMahon. And well, really, you could go back to the Montreal Screwjob and say that kicked it off. But
well, we have something really cool that we can do now that we're on Facebook Live is that we have the ability to actually respond to people as they comment. So Jeffrey Jones has commented, and he said that he heard that somebody originally said the higher power was going to be Christopher Daniels. I've heard that too.
I think Bruce Pritchard talked about that, and Vince literally looked at Christopher Daniels and went, he's too short.
Yeah, I imagine how painful it would have went. The difference... The chance that WCW may have been afforded if Christopher Daniel were the higher power and not Vince, because you're right. The Montreal Screwjob made Mr. McMahon. It made Vince relevant. It made him a character. The higher power angle and what he did with Stone Cold actually completely turned him into the Mr. McMahon that was the guy who just carried the whole thing all the way through, won the war. If that Mr. McMahon's not created, I don't know if they win the. Well, they probably do, just because
it's Vince. But I mean, it's a tighter battle for a longer period of time without that. But since we skipped your number 4,
no. I had number 4 was Mick wins.
Oh,
I just wanted to put my number 3 in with your number 4. I just completely obliterated your number 4 and didn't
you
really
got me thrown off. I have no idea where we are.
So that was my number 3 because they just matched.
Right,
so it's your number 3.
My number 3. CM Punk's pipe bomb, June 27th in Las Vegas. I don't know what you were doing, but I was kind of not watching wrestling. You know, my dad lives out of town, and whenever he would come in and stay, he would watch wrestling because he loves it. And you know, he just happened to be in town on my birthday, and he turned on Raw, and all of a sudden I see this guy, CM Punk, breaking that wall, man, and talking about Colt Cabana and Ring of Honor, and all the things you aren't supposed to say on WWE programming. And I was like, wait a second, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm hooked, and I've been watching ever since.
I was not watching at the time, and I had friends who were and coworkers who were, and they were telling me, because we would start talking about that I used to be huge into wrestling. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people go through a little hiatus where, like, there's a certain period of time where you stop watching for whatever reason. You go to college, or you're spending more time out of the house working, dating, doing things.
Yeah, girls seem more important than sweaty men.
And you get out of it for whatever reason. And this was my period being completely out of it. But we started talking about it, and he's telling me about this CM Punk guy. And I'm listening to this like, you can't do those kind of things. How is he not fired yet? And so he started showing me the YouTube videos, and the first YouTube video he ever showed me of CM Punk was the pipe bomb. Mm-hmm. And that was a moment where I just, like, I didn't understand what I'm seeing. Like, I'm from the Attitude Era. That, to me, was wrestling. And so I'm watching this guy take the Attitude Era and just kind of turn it on its ear. I have a new respect for it now that I'm completely back into it, but at the time, I had no idea. Like, the first time that I saw spinner belts,
mm-hmm.
I felt like such an old school guy. Like, you can't do that. How dare you? And now I'm looking at it like that's the least of my concerns. Actually, the U.S. Championship spinner belt, I still hold a grudge against that.
We all do.
But CM Punk was such a... He himself was a pipe bomb into the industry. And that particular moment, I will watch that again and again. Just occasionally it'll pop up in a YouTube suggestion, and I'm down the CM Punk rabbit hole.
Yeah, it was just a moment that personally drew me back in, out of context, had no idea what was going on. John Cena was just laying through a broken table, and this guy's just sitting at the top of the ramp talking trash in a Stone Cold shirt, no less. And it just made me go, I don't know why, but I like this guy, and I want to know where this leads to. And that went to Money in the Bank, which is probably one of my favorite matches. I mean, it just led to me getting way back into professional wrestling, and I got to thank CM Punk for that.
I didn't get back in right away. It actually took me a while to get in, but that was the first blip on the return radar for me. That was the first blip of, oh, there's something here. So CM Punk doesn't make my list because I don't have that attachment to the moment because I didn't watch it in real time, but, like, man, I wish I did. Like, it would so be on my list. That was your 3, right?
Yep, you're on 2, I think.
Number 2 is one that I struggled with because there is a really big moment that should be at number 2 for most people. It might even be your number 2. It might even be your number 1, actually. It should be there. But it's not going to make my list because it goes back to the what was I doing in the moment? How do I remember it? And I'm really confident that the moment that should be at number 2 for me isn't going to be at number 2 because I wasn't watching it live. But I was watching Mike Tyson live. And I was watching Mike Tyson and Stone Cold have a moment that's kind of like the pipe bomb because it was so real.
The showdown with the birds, man.
You're watching the baddest man on the planet in the ring with the baddest man on the planet. These are the 2 guys. They're in the ring, and I don't know what's going to happen because, again, I was a little smarter, I think, at this point. Like somebody smartened me up a little bit, and I think it was my cousin who was a huge Mike Tyson fan outside of this. And so he's way into this. Everyone's talking about Mike Tyson's going to be on Raw. Got to watch Raw. So we're watching Raw, and here's Mike Tyson in the ring, and here comes Stone Cold in the ring. What the hell is going to happen? And what ended up happening was magic, and the big fight breaks out, and you've got Vince yelling at him about how he's ruined it, and you've got Stone Cold laughing and smiling and smirking, and that might be that whole Mr. McMahon, Stone Cold thing that we talked about. That might be the biggest moment in that. Aside from the higher power.
Yeah.
The Mike Tyson Stone Cold face-off and Vince's bulging vein from his head and how angry he legitimately felt. Oh, my God. Mike Tyson and Stone Cold in the middle of the ring.
There was just so much there.
Oh.
And then, fast forward to WrestleMania. That was maybe one of the best Mania moments of that time frame.
Oh, yeah.
With the switch and, oh, God.
The switch and the beers and Vince and nobody knows what's going on. But all of those seeds of nobody knows what's going on were all planted right there at that time. One of my favorite moments of Raw. Top 2 moments ever.
All right. My number 2 also involves Stone Cold, but it has nothing to do with Mike Tyson.
It's the one that should be number 2 on my list.
Pillman's Got a Gun.
No, oh my God. It's not what should be on my list.
Pillman's Got a Gun, man. I remember watching that thinking they killed a guy. I thought Brian Pillman killed Stone Cold. I had to tune in the next week to know what the hell happened. I mean, a lot of people bought it, too. The cops were called in Cincinnati. People were worried about Brian Pillman's safety. They were worried about Stone Cold. I mean, the cops got called to the scene because people were like, hey, I know that house. Get over the blank street in Cincinnati. I mean, it was just one of the craziest things I've ever seen on live television anywhere. Not to mention, leading up to that, I was a huge Brian Pillman fan. I loved the loose cannon character. Because, like I said, I started out watching WCW, and that's when he was in the rivalry with Kevin Sullivan. So I got hooked there and kind of followed. He's kind of what made me follow, start following WWF more. But everything about that just made me go, holy crap! I don't know what I'm watching, but this isn't the cartoon characters that I've been seeing on WWF programming on Saturday mornings, pal. So that was really the moment that was like, oh, I don't know what this is. I'm a little too young to comprehend, but something's here, and I want to know what happens.
I feel like I know what your number 1 is now, but I'm not sure because. All right, before we get to our number 1s, I'm going to run through some things that didn't make my list that I really wanted them to make my list. If your number 1 is listed on here, don't reveal it yet.
We've already talked about my number 1.
We did?
Yeah. It was your, number 3 or something. Or 4, or whatever. Foley wins the title.
Oh, okay.
Mick Foley, it's a long story that I don't have time to get into. But, I was, for whatever reason, I gravitated towards the weirder and stranger and darker characters like Brian Pillman. And then when Mankind came around, he was revolutionary. His rivalry with The Undertaker got me hooked there.
The Boiler Room stuff is the next level.
And then the moment where Mick Foley and Mankind became my dude, where he's the reason I watched TNA, for Christ's sakes. that interview with JR, where it was a mix of character and his real life, where it was like, holy crap, what are they doing? And then after all that aired, you had the Authority and everything else going on. And above it all, everybody comes out and beats DX down and saves Mick's ass. And he beats, what was it, The Rock? I believe it was I don't even remember.
No, I don't.
I think it was The Rock.
Was it The Rock?
Yeah, I think they screwed over The Rock. Foley wins, and everybody hoists him on their shoulder.
I don't even
and
remember.
Carries him out.
That's why at this point I don't even remember who it was, because there was just so much. There were 19 guys in the ring.
It doesn't matter. The moment that matters is this deranged, screwed up guy who he spent his whole life to accomplish a goal, a dream, and everyone told him, "You're too weird to do it. You're too ugly. You're too screwed up." Above it all, he was able to push through all the challenges and all the blocks and stoppages in his way, and to accomplish that boyhood dream. Every time somebody says that phrase when it's related to wrestling, they talk about Shawn Michaels and his WrestleMania moment. No. Shawn Michaels, you can look at the guy and tell he's a professional wrestler. He belongs there. You look at Mick Foley's busted, sagging, deformed ass body from all the crazy stuff he's done in his career. People look at him and are like, what? This guy is not he's nothing. Yet somehow he managed to become champion of the world, and it was one of the greatest and most memorable moments for me in professional wrestling history, not just Raw. I mean, Mick Foley in real life is one of the nicest men, but inside the context of the character and the story they built for him in WWE programming, it was the perfect moment and the perfect championship win.
Well, there's a reason they say Foley is God. And I had to have Mick on my list, too, because it was a defining moment for me personally in the Monday Night War, in jumping back and forth between the two. We'll go through some of these other ones that didn't make the list after this, but I want to get my number one in there just because I want to review some of these other ones. They will tie into Stone Cold and Mick Foley, so I really want to get to those while we're hot on Foley. But my number one, game changer, it was another one of those defining moments that really made me realize how behind WCW had become. Because as a big WCW guy in the Monday Night War early on, I was a huge Chris Jericho guy. Oh. I was a Jerichoholic. Jericho versus Goldberg is one of my favorite things ever.
Greenberg.
No. Jericho beat Goldberg like 5 times. I saw it. Goldberg never showed up to the ring. He didn't want a piece of Jericho. Jericho's...
what was his security guard's
his
name?
Personal
Rufus?
Security.
I think they sell that Jericho personal security shirt on ProWrestlingTees.com, by the way.
So when I was told by either a friend or an uncle or somebody who was actually subscribing to things like PW Torch or Meltzer's stuff, when they told me that Jericho is making the change and Jericho will be on WWF, I had to see it. So we were looking heavy for it. And then it happened. And not only did it happen against The Rock, and it happened in the most beautiful way ever, the whole Millennium Countdown thing. It was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen.
Agreed. Hey, that moment's just outside my top 10.
Now it's outside your top 10.
Or top 5, sorry. But, there's a lot of great stuff that didn't make the cut on my top 5. I don't know what you got on your list that you had to cut, but Stone Cold in the beer truck.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought should be number 2.
Kurt Angle with the milk truck. That's up there for me. Rock and Mankind. This Is Your Life.
This Is Your Life was like my number 6.
The Vince McMahon in the hospital.
Dr. Stone Cold. I'll take it from here, nurse.
Yeah, Dr. Stone Cold, and then Mick Foley with the clown and everything, and Mr. Sacco making his debut. I mean, there's just so many great moments involving The Rock, Stone Cold, and Mankind.
Yes, all right, let me go through here and
oh, one I completely forgot about that someone put on our little Facebook feed here on the Tiger. Ric Flair returns as Vince's partner. That was a great storyline and an iconic moment.
And that ties into one that almost made my list. This would have been, I guess, number 7 on the list. I really wanted this to make it. But the night that the night of the last Nitro, where Vince does the whole, I own them, and he comes out and starts to do the whole thing, and Shane shows up, and when Shane informs him that he bought WCW, your name, it does say McMahon. It doesn't say Vince McMahon. That, to me, was the perfect way to finish that off. It was the perfect ending to the Monday Night War, and that should be on my list, but it's not, and I just can't find a way.
I can tell you why it's not on my list. I know it was important at the moment and an ending to the long battle, but I completely forget that happens, or that even happened. And when you brought it up, I was like, oh yeah, that was great. But it's not something that comes to my mind when I think about Monday Night Raw.
All right, let me roll a couple of by you that made it onto my list. Two of them are two different takes on the same thing. They're two different. It's the same thing that happened twice. They did it twice, but they did it in two completely different ways. So first, I do want to say that when Big Boss Man showed up at, I don't remember if we were calling him Paul White or the Giant or the Big Show or whatever we were calling him at the time, but when his dad died,
the funeral,
and Big Boss Man shows up at the funeral.
Oh God, yes.
That, to me, again, that blurred the lines. I didn't know what was real and what was fake.
You know what? I hate to jump all over your moment there, Mr. Emotional. We got some tissues in here somewhere.
Yeah, I'll need them.
But speaking of Big Boss Man, he was also involved in one of my favorite.
Al
Snow and the frickin' Chihuahua. Holy crap. I remember laughing my ass off about that for days. When I went to school the next morning, oh my God, he fed him his puppy. It was just one of the funniest and darkest things that happened on television, and it was hilarious, and we talked about it forever. It was great.
Yeah, that's...
Unfortunately, the payoff with the Dogs from Hell kennel match or whatever was terrible, but yeah, that was an awesome moment.
So one of the things that they did twice that they did completely different both times, and I remember both of them so well, the weddings of Stephanie McMahon. Because first you have the unholy wedding, where the Undertaker has her crucified and is going to marry her. And then you have the Triple H trip to Vegas. That watching that in real time. We watched it that night. That was a night that I know we were live on Raw for whatever reason. I know we were live on Raw. And we watched as Test and Stephanie are in the ring, and Triple H comes out with that goofy, stupid hat and rolls the videotape. Oh, my God.
That was a great moment. Definitely one of my favorite moments we'll never see again because of, the whole drugging and getting married angle. But that also leads me to another Triple H angle that happened on Monday Night Raw that we'll never see or hear.
I swear to God.
Katie Vick.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
As weird and creepy and as screwed up as that was, you have to admit it was entertaining for at least, that 10-minute vignette or whatever it was. And another Triple H moment while we're on the game, his return and after blowing out his quad in Madison Square Garden.
Yep. Do have a note from Nicholas Burks on our Facebook. Apparently, the Big Show funeral was a SmackDown thing. I don't remember that.
I don't know.
I see. That must be, in all honesty, probably about the time that I was done. I could probably go look at the dates on that and realize that was probably about the time that I was checked out from wrestling completely. If that was later early 2000s type range is about the time that I was out, and that may be why it's kind of foggy in my brain, but that was and that would mean that maybe the Al Snow Chihuahua thing might have been SmackDown too.
I don't think so, but maybe. I don't know.
But that was
either way a great moment. Your Chihuahua.
Eating a Chihuahua, great moment either way. There are so many things about Raw that whether you watched way back at the beginning, which I don't remember if I watched the original.
Doink the Clown. How could we forget Doink the Clown? The entire first episode was based around Doink the Clown.
Right, but I don't remember watching that in real time. I don't remember watching the early Raws live. I don't have a lot of emotional investment in the early Raws. And one of my big issues, too, is that I used to watch a lot of the Gene Okerlund recap shows on the weekends.
On Saturdays.
Saturdays. That used to be a big part of what I was watching. So there's a lot of fogginess, like for me in the SmackDown thing towards the end, in thinking that the funeral was on Raw. There's a lot of early stuff that I don't know if this was actually on Raw, was this actually at a pay-per-view. My sweet spot is like 97 to 2002.
Well, I think every person on the planet was watching professional wrestling at that time. But a little bit before the Attitude Era, I couldn't do a podcast about Monday Night Raw moments without mentioning the greatest match in Monday Night Raw history. Bret Hart versus the 1-2-3 Kid. It was, 2-3 segments when they didn't do 2 or 3 segment matches because it was, an hour show. Holy Christ. If you go back and watch that on the network with JR's commentary, it is literally, that's like main event of any pay-per-view in the world quality match. And they put it on Monday Night Raw. It made Sean Waltman a name. It showed how good Bret Hart was, which I think everybody knew, but it really showed how skilled he was. It was just a great match, man. Also with Waltman, you had the Razor Ramon angle with the money and the moonsault where he brained himself and then somehow got talked into doing another one and won. God, there's just so much stuff that happened on Monday Night Raw.
I think going into the 25th anniversary here in a couple of weeks, if you have the WWE Network, go back and watch some old Raws, because I found myself doing that just I started a couple of months ago, and I would just put on an old Raw and just start watching it to see the differences. I still love that old Raw. I think the competition at that point led to them pushing envelopes and doing things that they're not doing today because there is no competition. So they're the only game in town. There's a lot of things that I feel like they're doing that are lazy. But back then, it was like even the middle of the night matches, even everything that happened in that show meant something in a storyline next week. And it's like today, in that period, I don't remember a lot of times where somebody would get their hands on somebody before the pay-per-view. And now I feel like you see the pay-per-view match 2 or 3 different ways 3 weeks before the payper-view. It's so formulaic.
It is to an extent, but if you don't remember them doing that back in the day, they did too. But yeah, man, there's just so many. You have to remember from about 95 to about 2005, they literally had the greatest roster in the history of professional wrestling. You had, look at the guys that came out of that. You don't get a Stone Cold every day. You don't get a Bret Hart. You don't get a Rock. You have some of the most talented and gifted people at this profession in the world in the same place and the same time. We've had some tremendous talents like Brock Lesnar come up and different people throughout the generations, but you've never had a collection of so many multi-talented people at once in the history of the business, and that's why it changed. So it's kind of hard to compare anything to that era because God, they were just so damn good.
Right, but they went and got those people. They went and took chances on Mark Henry's and on Kurt Angle's because they were in a fight. They needed it. And they took chances with the stories. And that's where we get some of this stuff, is some of these stories, we just said they couldn't do some of these today because they won't let them do them today. So, but that's a good list. We could keep going on and on with this. And we will. We'll do more of this. This was fun. We'll do more of these little podcasts on Facebook and YouTube.
Didn't you already have a subject for next week or whenever?
I've got a couple of working ideas that we could do. But the great thing about being pro wrestling fans is that we could come up with a top 5 list for literally anything. We were joking around just now that we could have a top 5 list of top 5 favorite Brock Lesnar moments. We could do top 5.
Oh, I already have a number 1 for that, where he assaulted the one-legged kid and almost killed him in front of his mother.
I was going to say Shooting Star Press.
That was at WrestleMania. Actually, I think he assaulted the one-legged kid at SmackDown.
And I just said it could be any Brock Lesnar moment. It doesn't have to be Brock Lesnar Raw moments. It could be any Brock Lesnar.
All right, so
moment.
I stand by my statement of assaulting a one-legged kid.
There you go. So we'll do this more. Make sure to like the 1130 The Tiger Facebook page. You can subscribe on YouTube as well, and then that means that every time that we do these, we will go ahead and send you that little notification so you can know that we're talking about wrestling. And like Jeffrey and Burks did, we can get in on the conversation with you while we're live and do this little live show. I like it. It's good stuff.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. I know there's some crappy things that we screwed up that I noticed, but yeah, it's good.
That's all right.
Good things happening.
We'll figure it out as we go. We are not professional broadcasters, even though the setup looks like it. That's
Are we
Puff.
wrapping this now?
Yeah, that's Puff. I'm Greg. This is the Raw Meat Podcast. We out.